Hi, everybody, and welcome to Conversations of Impact for Kids. I'm Kathy Dominy, and tonight my very special guest is Bill Bennett, and I'm going to read Bill's bio for you so that you know what a legend he is. So Bill Bennett is an award-winning filmmaker and author. In his home country of Australia, he has won the equivalent of the Oscar, which the Australian Film Institute Award, for Best Film and Best Director, and had been nominated for a further 12 times. His documentary work has been awarded 2 Logies, which is the Australian television's highest award. He has had 2 feature films in official selection at the Cairns Film Festival, Uncertain Regard, and 4 feature films in official selection at Toronto. He has won Best Picture at Karlovy Vary, Palm Springs, and Hawaii Film Festivals. His work has screened at the New York Museum of Modern Art, and he has had 3 major film retrospectives in Germany, the US, and India. As well, Penguin Random House recently completed publishing his trilogy of young adult novels, Palace of Fires, one of its largest selling Australian YA titles in years. And you have very generously carved time out of your busy schedule to speak to little old me. So thank you so much, Bill. I'm so grateful for you being here, and welcome to this podcast.
Kathy, I'm honored. I am honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Bill, the reason that I'm having these conversations with these inspirational leaders is to inspire the parents and the children who are listening to this podcast. And I really want to tap into the wisdom and the cream of all of your amazing insights, and give the listener 3 big takeaways that they can apply to their lives and really empower young people to the next level so that they can navigate through their lives to adulthood really well, and on another level of self-awareness and confidence and self-esteem. So you've just been completing an amazing project on fear. So I'd really, really love to hear more about that from you.
Fear. What a time to do a film on fear. Hey?
Absolutely.
It's crazy, really, because I was making a film on intuition, which I completed, called PGS, Intuition is Your Personal Guidance System. And during the making of that film, I discovered that the biggest blockage or obstacle to accessing your native intuitive powers is fear. Mm. And so I began to think about that, and I started to wonder, what is fear? How does it work? Why do we have it? Do we really need it? These questions kept on coming up. And I mean, what I do with my work really is based out of curiosity. I really do something because I'm curious to know what it is. And so I became very curious about fear. And so what happened was, last year, the year before now, 2019, I pretty much spent the year working on this film. I traveled extensively around the world. I ended up interviewing 30 experts on fear from various walks of life. There were scientists, biochemists. I even interviewed a combat veteran who'd become a mercenary. Wow. Looking at fear from that perspective. I looked at just some ordinary people who'd been through extraordinary fear and come out. And so I was able to get quite a broad cross-section of opinion about fear. Pardon me. Then COVID happened, and I was not able to complete the film. So in the meantime, what I've done is I've put out a website resource called facingfearinterviews.com, which has a lot of these interviews in it, edited down, and people can go to that and they can access information about fear. But basically, during this whole period, I've come to understand certain things about fear. And it's famously said, you need, what is it? The only thing you need to fear about fear is fear itself. Yeah. I'm paraphrasing that. Yeah. I discovered that that's not true. In fact, there's no need to fear fear. It is a protective mechanism. It's there to help us and alert us and guide us. There are certain types of fear, of course, that become very destructive. We can talk about that. But essentially, fear is not something that you need fear. If approached the right way, fear can in fact be used to enormous benefit to help you through life.
Mm-hmm. And I know previously when we've talked, we've discussed this concept of the true fear and the false fear, and how that's affecting people's lives. So could you explain that point a little bit for me, please?
Yeah, I interviewed a lady named Dr. Lissa Rankin. She lives in Northern California, and she's become a world expert on fear. She's written a book called The Fear Cure. And in that book, she talks, and in the interview as well, she talks about two types of fear: false fear, true fear, and false fear. True fear is survival fear, which is something that we all have innately and something that we need. It's very primitive, it is physical, and it is a survival mechanism to keep the species alive. But then there's false fear, which is illusory fear, which is imagined fear, which is fear that we concoct. And that's the fear that most of us suffer from. It's manufactured. Well, it presents as stress, anxiety. It can lead to all sorts of health problems. It can be very destructive, but we don't need it. And one of the first things that I do when I have fear, I feel fear rising within me for whatever reason. One of the first things I do is I go, right, is this a true fear or is this a false fear? And if it's a false fear, then I go through a certain series of steps then to mitigate it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this false fear, is it innate within us, or is that can that be learned behavior?
It's very much learned behavior. It's environmental. It comes through trauma, parenting, stuff we see on social media and on television and so forth. But it's stuff we also concoct ourselves. And in a sense, it's almost like we love to create fear. I met some people during the making of the film that said, look, I need fear to do well in my work. I needed to motivate myself. I needed to give myself an edge. But in fact, there is a cost to that. It can be a very destructive thing. And in the end, you actually don't need it for those purposes. But false fear is destructive fear. It's fear that we bring into ourselves. And as far as children are concerned, children are born with the true fear, which is a survival fear. It's part of their instinctive, intuitive mechanism for protecting themselves. But the false fear is something that is learned, that they acquire, but they don't need to.
And so if they have developed this false fear, which can, I mean, in my experience, certainly with the children I've worked with and raising my own children, it can be quite paralyzing. You know, that sort of fear of taking any action because of this, you know, the big monster that's waiting out there, sort of thing. So are there sort of processes that somebody can apply to this false fear that can help them rationalize and get perspective and maybe move through it more easily?
There are, Kathy. One of the people that I interviewed, and in fact, he's probably the person that had the greatest impact on me through the making of this film, is a fellow called Dr. Richard Schwartz. He is a professor at Harvard, but he has developed, he's a clinical psychologist, and he has developed a system of healing, I guess you'd call it, called the internal family systems. Now, what he does is, what the internal family systems is it says we all have parts within us that have distinct personality. Like we might have a part that is anger. So he says, right, the first thing, when you feel anger rise within you, say, okay, this is a part. It has a personality, it has a characteristic. I'm going to find where it is in my body. Oh, it's in my chest. Okay, so I'm going to go into my chest and I'm going to say, hello, Mr. Anger, how are you? How come you're angry today? What's troubling you? And what he does, and fear is a part as well. So what he does is he personalizes these parts in his body. He finds them, he feels them, he personalizes them, and then he befriends them, which is a really interesting concept. So he gets to know the part that is anger. He gets to know the part that is fear. He gets to know the part that is self-doubt. There's a multitude of various parts that exist within all of us. And he gets to know them. He dresses them. He has discussions with them. He says, now, fear, what are you doing today? Why are you around? Why are you knocking on my door? Come on, out with it. And in doing that, what happens is that the potency of the fear, the potency of the anger, the toxicity of these parts begins to drop away. And I mean, it's a really interesting exercise. And if you're interested in, anybody's interested in learning more about this, Dr. Richard Schwartz is prominent on YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube stuff where people can go and have a look. But the other thing, Kathy, I do is this. And I got to say, I walked the Camino de Santiago quite a few years ago. And I got to say, I was riddled with fear on that walk. Absolutely riddled with it. I had fear about whether I would finish. I had fear about whether my knee would give out. I had all these sorts of fears. But one big fear that I had every single day was, would I find a bed that night? Because you don't pre-book your accommodation. You walk for, 25, 30, sometimes longer kilometers, and you get to a little village and you hope that there'll be a bed for you, because there's a lot of people on that Camino wanting beds, and there's only limited accommodation. So one of the major fears that I had each day was the fear of getting a bed. And I was walking along one day and I was thinking, well, this is bloody stupid, because here I am, I'm in the most extraordinary part of the world in Spain, and I'm having a great time, but my day is being destroyed by this fear I have of not getting a bed. Yeah. So what am I going to do about that? And then something occurred to me. I thought, all right, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is this: I will get to the village and there'll be no beds. All right. Okay. So then what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is I might end up sleeping under a tree. I've got a sleeping blanket. I could lay a blanket out on the grass. I could sleep in a church. That might be an adventure. That might actually be really cool, sleeping under a tree or sleeping in a church.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, that's not so bad. Okay, so if I can't get a bed in this next place I'm going to, then I'll sleep under a tree, or I'll find a church or some other place. And it might lead to some extraordinary revelation or adventure, or meeting somebody that, that could have some kind of impact on my life. And as soon as I faced my fear and walked through what was the worst that could happen, and realized that the worst that could happen wasn't actually that bad, then all the fear just went away. Yeah. Then the next thing I did, Kathy, was this. I thought, okay, well, this works for the Camino and for me not finding a bed. What about if I apply this tenet to other aspects of my life? I take this back with me from the Camino back to Australia, and I apply this to other fears that I have in my life. And bloody hell, it worked.
Amazing. Yeah. So in a sense, I mean, what we're saying is, I think sometimes people are trying to avoid it, trying to push it aside, trying to pretend it's not there. And then, of course, it manifests in ways in your life like illness or depression or all those sort of destructive things that we all, have to manage at times. So what we're saying is sort of acknowledge it, embrace it, learn from it, and sort of deal with it head on rather than trying to avoid it. Is that sort of the sentiment that you got from your interviews?
Absolutely. And that's the reason that I called the film Facing Fear. Yeah. What I did is I came up with the 5 F's of fear. Find the fear in your body, feel it. So once you've found it in your body, feel it. And just actually, is it a burning sensation? Is it a pain in the gut? Okay, you feel it. Then you face it. Okay, so I've got this fear. It exists here. It feels like this. You face your fear. The next step, which is the hard step, is you friend it. You befriend it. And you go, all right, let's just acknowledge that I have fear. What is this fear trying to tell me? Because it's here for a purpose. And its purpose isn't necessarily a destructive, malign purpose. Its purpose is to alert me to something, to point me in a better direction. Now, how can I do it? The only way that I can do that is to befriend it. And once you've befriended it, it loses its, as I said before, its toxicity, its potency. You realize that it is there, in fact, to help you. And then you can free it. You don't need to be bound by it. So you can free it. There's no way you're ever going to let go of fear, and you don't necessarily need to let go of it as well, because in the end, even false fear, if it's brought right the way back, if you go through a very sort of tough process of reduction on a false fear, you'll find the root cause of it. And invariably that root cause is something that is legitimate, that you do have to deal with. But if you run away from it, the fear is only ever going to chase you down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I do totally resonate with that, because we've had moments in our lives as a family where we've had fear. And I found as well that helped us through it was perspective. So, I mean, a few years ago, we were very close to losing our home because we were redundant for nearly a year, and it was the best year and the worst year. So the best year for growth and realizations and, all of that sort of thing. And also there was a lot of stress and a lot of fear there. Because as you know, I've got a very large family, and we were thinking, oh my goodness, what if we don't have a house, But at the time we had friends whose child was going through incredibly difficult illnesses that we didn't know whether he was going to recover from. And and I think perspective helps with fear, in the sense that I said to my husband, we could put all of our problems in the hat with that family's problems, and we'd pick ours back out again. So I think sometimes we get locked in a situation, and it's a really good thing to step back if we can, and just jolt that reality and get that perspective. And then you can practice those 5 F's that you were talking about. But once you've got out of that sort of hypnotic catastrophization of everything, you need to sort of step back and reframe and work from that sort of point.
It's very true. And this comes back once again to what's the worst that can happen.
Yeah.
And we might lose the house, but the worst that can happen is that one of the children gets hit by a bus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or something like that, Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you were interviewing all these amazing people, did you find that there was sort of a gratitude for the fear in their lives?
Well, that's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about that. Gratitude. I think they had come to an equanimity with fear, that they saw it for what it actually was. One of the people that I interviewed is Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's a very famous scientist, Stanford, worked at Stanford for quite some time. And he's one of these few people who genuinely is able to balance science and mysticism, if you like, or spirituality. He's a biochemist. But one of the things that he said was that we as a species have been built to handle true fear, but true fear is only momentary. Right. In other words, biologically, we have been built to respond to fear of the tiger jumping out of a cage, jumping out of a cave and chasing us.
Yeah.
So our response mechanism is only built for a short time frame. But false fear, of course, lives with us day by day and at night and in our sleep and so forth. And our bodies weren't built for that kind of ongoing response to fear. What he said was this: and by the way, the other thing too he said was this, is that our body can't differentiate between true fear and false fear. So when we have a fear response, our body's not saying, oh, this is a false fear, I'm not going to worry about this. It's a fear response, and
sure.
Accordingly. And what it does is it triggers the fight or flight response, which primitively was how you dealt with fear. You'd either fight the predator or you'd flee from it. Mm. What happens is that biomechanically, all of your blood and the chemicals in your body go to the extremities. So they go to your legs and your muscles so that you can run really fast, or so that you can wrestle with a tiger, whatever. But in the process, what happens is that all that blood and chemical responses and so forth shift away from the brain, because they've all got to go to the extremities for the fight or flight. What happens is that you become stupid. So when you're in fear, you become stupid. You can't think. You know, I think we've all had this situation where suddenly we're hit with a panic response and we can't think. You know, we're sort of frozen and we can't think properly. And in fact, given the society that we live in at the moment, where it's not very likely that we're going to be attacked by a tiger jumping out of a cave, but we are going to be attacked by some kind of response that is going to require us to think cognitively and think fast. But the biochemical fight or flight response actually takes blood and nutrients away from the brain. And that's why it's so dangerous, you know, and then if you're in fear over a prolonged period of time, you just can't think straight.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I asked every single interviewee was this. I asked her a practical question. I said, all right, you've got a single mum, she's got a few kids, she's lost her job, she doesn't have much money, she's suddenly hit with fear. What advice would you give her? Because I wanted a practical set of advice on how somebody would deal with a generic problem like that. And invariably, probably the common response was, the first thing people said was, stop and breathe. Really, and bring the blood back into the brain. You know, stop the blood from going where it's not really needed. Bring it back into the brain so you can think your way through the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose then what we're taking away from this conversation is, you know, we don't need to fear fear. We need to acknowledge it and do the 5 Fs, which I'm going to put in the write-up next to this video because they're so brilliant and they're so easily applied actually, and so perfect for children. And being able to identify it. And I think that's a really important point here, because there's often things that are happening within us, but we're not mindful enough to stop, breathe, identify. As you said, where is it? It is in my chest. Okay, what's it telling me? Why has it come up? And I think giving it that attention and really learning how to dance with it, I think lessens the control and the power that it has over us, which is so sort of liberating, because we don't need to be running from it all the time. We know that we can sit in a room with it and sort of coexist and get some really important lessons on how we can powerfully move forward embracing it, which is really quite revolutionary if you've been living with fear for a long time.
It really is, Kathy. You have to say, all right, it serves a purpose in my life. What is that purpose? I don't need to be antagonistic towards it. I don't need to fear it. I need to get to the point where I can converse with it and find out what it is it's trying to tell me, because it is trying to tell me something. And as soon as I figure out what it is it's trying to tell me, I don't need it. You can go away.
Amazing. Well, Bill, I'm just so grateful for you spending this time with me. You know how much I adore and respect you and your work, and I'm thrilled that you came to speak to me today, and I'm very, very grateful.
Well, you're doing amazing work as well, Kathy, and I'm just so pleased to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will stop the recording. So thank you everybody for listening, and I'll put all of Bill's details in the write-up next to his amazing interview. So thank you so much for listening. Bye.